Hi Amanda, your video comparing and contrasting Sakura and Katara was amazing. I really love how you detailed all of the shortcomings and redeeming qualities of each character. I definitely shared your feelings on Sakura in particular. I had completely forgotten that she was being built up to be this amazing genjutsu medical ninja, and it sort of never really happened. They really only just gave her the ability to go, as you put it so nicely, smashy smashy. Sorry Sasuke. Oh. No. Okay. Totally forgot my glasses. No wonder I could barely read the script. Your video actually reminded me of Legend of Korra, which we actually just finished watching recently. A lot of people weren't super happy with Legend of Korra. They didn't think it was much better than Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I'm actually probably a little bit of an outlier in that I thought that Legend of Korra was at least as good as Avatar. Specifically, I found each individual season of Korra to have amazing world building, premises, characters, and villains. That said, Korra also had this uncanny ability to somehow leave me incredibly disappointed at the end of each season. Yeah, the endings weren't amazing, and honestly, that was a little bit of a letdown. So I figured, since we're talking about anime anyway, it would be a perfect time to dive into some of my feelings here. So I'm just going to go over Season 1 of Korra. Oh, and obviously, spoilers for Season 1 of Legend of Korra. I don't know why I'm telling you that, because you've already watched it with me. I just felt compelled to for some reason. I don't know. So as a brief recap, Korra Season 1 focuses on a conflict between non-benders and benders inside Republic City. This conflict is heightened by the political activist and general revolutionist, Amon, who has the unique ability to take away people's bending. He forms a political movement called the Equalists that strive to overthrow the current government of Republic City and install himself so that he can form a society where bending is no longer a thing. Amon primarily works through small and calculated political upheavals that are aided by his supporters. And he amasses a large amount of support throughout the course of the season, including, and not limited to, the president of a massive technology corporation. This all eventually climaxes in a showdown between Korra and Amon, in which they vie for the support of Republic City's non-bending population, as well as Amon's core supporters.
Amon has been lying to you. The spirits didn't give him the power to take people's bending away. He uses blood bending to do it. Amon is a waterbender.
These are the main keys to Amon's success at this point in the season. Amon seeks to seal his power through a show of force by removing the bending from the only remaining airbenders in the world. Through the battle, Amon is able to remove all but Korra's airbending, which he's then able to use to force Amon into a position where he has no choice but to show off the fact that he's a bender in front of all of his supporters.
He's waterbending.
He is a bender.
The scar's fake.
The Avatar was telling the truth.
And there's a train coming. I don't know if you can hear that. I love living next to train tracks and airplanes and everything. You know what, I'm just going to talk through it. So I actually really love the premise of this entire season, and this is all great so far, but this is the moment where things really start to fall apart for me. After Amon is forced to show that he is secretly a bender, the show just kind of implies that everyone, including all of his most loyal supporters, just immediately turn their backs on him, and he's shunned from Republic City. And somehow in that simple action, the entire political movement that he had formed just immediately falls apart, as though everyone just thinks it's invalid. On the surface, this may seem like a really clean and tidy way to wrap things up, but my problem with it is it actually doesn't address the core conflict of what was going on in this season. That conflict wasn't alone that Amon was working to start a revolution. It was instead that the conflict between non-benders and benders had reached a point where Amon was able to convince a large portion of the non-bending population that it was worth a revolution. Amon on his own was a pretty powerful and capable individual when it came to fighting, but he wasn't going to be able to overthrow an entire city just with his ability to take bending. What really allowed Amon to gain the power that he did was that his message of equality for non-benders allowed him to gain the level of support he needed to push his mission forward. Ultimately, it came down to things like the technology, the resources, the money, the access, and even things like the combat training for his supporters who didn't have it yet. These are the things that allowed him to amass the amount of power and become as big of a threat as he was. And his message was obviously much more complex than just bending bad. It's established throughout the season that non-benders don't receive the same treatment as benders do in Republic City. Sometimes this is obvious, like how the entire city idolizes pro-bending, or how the police force is composed entirely of metal benders. Other times it's not so obvious, like how the city council is composed entirely of benders, and how there's not even a single non-bending member on the council.
Amon is not going to stop with the bending triads. Eventually he will come for all us benders, our friends, our families. Vote for this task force, and I will stop Amon before it's too late. All in favor?
This all works to really serve to justify the non-benders' willingness to go along with such a violent political movement. His supporters have already shown that they believe in Amon and his mission to the point where they have potentially already given up things like family, ways of life, or potentially would even be willing to die doing things like fighting the entire Republic Army's navy, just to create this world that Amon has promised. Amon has truly led them to believe that bending is the key source of all of their problems, and it would be so much better if they could just get rid of bending altogether. This resolve is shown no more clearly in how Hiroshi Sato pretty much gets driven to the point of either maiming or even killing his daughter just because she works against Amon's mission and can't see it his way.
What do you think you're doing? You are aiding the very people who took your mother away! I now see there is no chance to save you!
I really have a hard time believing all of these supporters would just give up and stop supporting Amon the moment they realize he's actually a waterbender. And it's not even like this show leaves this up to interpretation either. Amon's right-hand man, the one who had been working with him most closely and putting his life most on the line for Amon, turns on him and betrays him the moment he sees Amon doing bloodbending.
Everything the Avatar said is true, isn't it? I just saw you bloodbend her. You traitor! I dedicated my life to you!
It's hard to believe that the show was trying to imply that any portion of the equalist movement was going to splinter off and survive, or the political movement itself was going to fracture into portions that were all still working towards that common goal of removing bending, or at the very minimum just preserving equal rights for non-benders. So let's talk about a hypothetical situation here. Let's go ahead and rewrite a portion of the show. Let's say at the beginning of the finale, when Amon goes ahead and continues to perpetrate the lie that he is not a bender when Korra attempts to out him. Let's say instead of that, he acknowledged the lie and revealed himself as a bender at that point in time. He could say something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm sorry, I know I was a waterbender the whole time, but look how far we've come, and I haven't had to ever use my waterbending. This is the world we could create." I honestly think that most, if not all of his supporters would immediately place him into a camp of one of the good benders. And even disregarding this and considering the way things actually did happen in the show, I believe that most of his supporters would still have the same reaction when they see him waterbending. After all, he was basically in a life or death situation fighting against Korra and was forced to use his waterbending to survive. I think a lot of his supporters would be confused in that moment, but it still wouldn't be enough to sort of overpower that core feeling of why they got involved into the equalist movement in the first place. It's human nature to go and try to justify one's beliefs, even in the face of something that goes against that. So why do I think this is the case? Well, let's look at a real-world example. Late in the 2016 American election, there was an Access Hollywood tape released in which Donald Trump said this.
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the... You can do anything.
Someone who was in opposition of Donald Trump's election would have probably said something along the lines of, "Oh my gosh, he's so terrible. Oh my gosh, he bragged about sexual assault. Oh my gosh, look, it's the nail in his coffin. No one will elect him now. He might as well resign. There's no way he could still become president after this." Spoiler alert, he does. In fact, polling pretty much just showed a small dip in support for Trump, about 10% after the tape was released. And then about a week later, support was pretty much right back to where it was before the tape was released. By that point, enough people had had a chance to talk about the tape, what it meant, and rationalize things in their head. Basically, his supporters collectively acknowledged that at least he was making an off-color joke that maybe wasn't that funny, and at worst he was sort of an asshole. But they were still going to vote for him anyway due to other issues that they thought were more important. Now, bringing things back to Korra, I feel like Amon being outed as a waterbender would have probably had the same effect on his supporters. I'm sure some of them probably would have left there thinking that they might not still support the equalist movement, but a political movement that had amassed that much power would have still had a lot of loyal people who are willing to stay on. And the way the show handles it by showing that the conflict was resolved just by showing Aemon was a liar about his bending completely flies in the face of acknowledging how dangerous othering and hateful rhetoric can truly be. In Aemon's case, he led people to believe that bending was the source of all their problems. In Trump's case, he led people to believe that the culture war and immigrants are the source of all of people's problems. In both of these cases, that person being outed as a terrible person isn't enough to really turn their support entirely away. To be honest, the shame is I feel like it would have been really easy to resolve this conflict in a better way. You can still have Aemon running off in shame and getting blown up by his brother to resolve that portion of the conflict, but then you have to have and show the real politically painful resolution happening in the background. Have a scene where Tenzin talks about how they're going to increase the size of the city council and make sure that they maintain a 50-50 non-bender and bender membership. That would ensure that non-benders truly had a voice in government and felt as though they were being represented. You could even go as far to talk about things like police reformation, or things like social welfare programs that might benefit non-benders. After all, they must be completely disadvantaged to find certain types of work due to the fact that it would be a lot more desirable to have someone who could bend an element doing a certain task. Heck, you could even redo the right-hand man's betrayal. Instead of having the triggering incident be that Aemon uses bloodbending in front of him, it could be something like he was upset with how badly Aemon treated Korra and he felt like it was time to switch sides. But the show instead decides to just sort of write it off and assume that people would be entirely willing to just drop their ideologies because they were deceived on one issue. Then it exacerbates this issue by allowing Korra to get Deus Ex-anged into getting her bending back, and then also give back the bending of the police chief, and is implied through that she gives back bending to pretty much everyone that probably had their bending taken away. Just by that alone, it is made apparent that Aemon and the Equalist movement have no lasting effect on Republic City at all. Not only is the political movement dead, but all of the damage that Aemon did can effectively be repaired. The show implies life will continue and non-benders won't have any more hard feelings. I find this to be a dangerous thing to present as acceptable. In our world, it can be so easy for us who are well off and privileged to think that the status quo is acceptable and should be preserved. And we can do this even while looking at other people who might be underprivileged or underrepresented in that same system. Sometimes we need to be aware of this, and sometimes we need to know that change might need to happen. And sometimes that change could be painful. Hopefully not political revolution level painful, but you know. Also, I know you didn't really want to talk politics, but somehow this letter got there anyway, so I'm sorry about that. Regardless, I'm having a lot of fun talking anime with you, and I would love to talk more about it in the future. Love always, Ryan. Two planes? Sounds like a jet. Just with not a single non-bender.